In Chapter 1, Nevare grapples with recurring, conflicted dreams of a mystical woman linked to Speck magic, warning him that the magic now controls him. He awakens to his life at the Academy, confronting guilt over the Speck plague and complex feelings about Gernia's expansionist policies. During a lecture, he reflects on the ethical conflict between his duty and his country's treatment of the Plainspeople. A letter from his mentor, Sergeant Durrell, encourages him to focus on inner strength despite physical changes. Later, he learns he'll return home for his brother's wedding, prompting him to reevaluate his engagement to Carcina. In Chapter 2, Nevare begins his journey by visiting his uncle Seifert, comforting him over his daughter Epony's choices. On board a ship, Nevare is mocked for his weight by fellow passengers. His calm, firm warning unexpectedly intimidates them, resulting in a later accident that leaves one seriously injured. Disembarking, he strays from his father's itinerary, staying with a friendly farmer whose kitchen maid shares a memorable night with him. Continuing his journey eastward, Nevare grows more self-sufficient, encountering prisoners forced to build the King's Road and reflecting on his growing confidence and changing self-perception as he ventures farther from home. In Chapter 3, Nevare ventures deeper into the Midlands and explores the Spindle Dance, a ruin emanating mysterious energy. He feels a powerful magical connection to the spindle. When a boy in a tourist group disturbs the structure by attempting to carve into it, Nevare senses a dangerous surge of magic. He saves the boy from falling, but his reaction unnerves the others, hinting at his growing bond with the spindle's magic. He then arrives home to a cold welcome from his family, including his father, who expresses disappointment over Nevare's appearance and weight, culminating in a tense confrontation. In Chapter 4, Nevare struggles with physical labor on his father's orders, hoping it will help him lose weight before his brother's wedding. He is embarrassed by his weight gain, suspecting a connection to a past illness. His mother helps with his clothing, and Nevare reflects on his worsening condition. As he works, hunger and fatigue torment him. He grows frustrated by his lack of progress and resolves to regain control of his body. Despite his efforts, his new clothes still don't fit well, and he worries about disappointing his family at the upcoming wedding. In Chapter 5, Nevare attends his brother's wedding, feeling embarrassed by his appearance and facing rejection from others, including Carcina. He inadvertently reveals sensitive information about the plague, angering his father. Nevare is disturbed by a gruesome sacrificial ritual in a garden and contemplates its implications. He tries to distance himself from the unsettling event, but later faces ridicule at the wedding feast when a servant brings him excessive food, triggering his deep hunger. His father chastises him harshly for his behavior, threatening to send him into military service. Nevare ends the day overwhelmed and drunk. In Chapter 6, Nevare grapples with his deteriorating relationships, especially with his critical father, after a medical discharge ends his military career. He struggles with weight gain linked to the Speck plague and resents the condition. Nevare isolates himself, growing hopeless as his family fails to understand his struggles. After a tense exchange with his mother, he feels utterly alone. He later seeks out Sergeant Durrell, who listens to Nevare's story about his magical condition and its effects, suggesting he seek help from others who understand magic. Nevare resolves to keep fighting, despite the overwhelming odds. In Chapter 7, Nevare faces the consequences of his expulsion, enduring public scorn and laborious tasks. He visits the failed Bajawi village with Sergeant Durrell, encountering the Kedona survivors and Dawara, who has fallen into ruin. Nevare confronts Dawara, leading to a bitter clash and Dawara stabbing him in the gut. Despite the injury, Nevare survives, and they leave Dawara's body behind. As they ride back, Nevare struggles with the reality of his situation, his weight, and the possibility of being cursed by magic. Durrell offers his support, suggesting Nevare must find a way to turn the magic against itself. In Chapter 8, Nevare continues his forced confinement and labor, reflecting on his struggles with his body and his father's punishment. His weight gain, attributed to a magical curse, leads to a confrontation with his father, who dismisses it. Nevare's routine includes menial tasks, secret letters to his cousin Epony, and further physical exertion, all while he contemplates his future. He learns of sickness in Franner's Bend and attempts to warn his father, but is dismissed. His relationship with food grows more obsessive as he salvages his ruined meal, realizing that his magical transformation is altering his body in profound ways. In Chapter 9, Nevare wakes to a grim reality, discovering his family and household ravaged by the plague. His father is incoherent with grief, and Nevare learns his mother, brother, and sister are all dead. He digs graves for his family and servants, burdened by the enormity of the loss. As Nevare processes the deaths, he reflects on his strained relationship with his sister and wonders about the fate of his other family members. After burying the dead, Nevare seeks solace in food and plans a more dignified burial for his family, though his father remains distant and unresponsive. In Chapter 10, Nevare takes charge of the family estate while his father recovers from illness. Tensions rise when his father accuses him of corruption, disowns him, and drives him away. Nevare decides to leave, despite his sister Jarl's plea to stay. She expresses how her life had improved while he managed the household. Nevare promises to send for her once he's settled, but leaves uncertain of his future. He departs with minimal possessions, including a packet of food from Jarl and a farewell from the old soldier, Sergeant Durrell. Nevare rides away, unsure of where he's headed. In Chapter 11, Nevare reflects on his freedom after being disowned and struggles to adapt to his new life. He observes Franner's Ben, noticing the contrast between the established areas and the rougher parts populated by plainspeople. He searches for a horse, finding one, Clove, from a trader named Jiri, but has to haggle hard to lower the price. Nevare eventually buys the horse, but parts with his beloved mount, Sir Lofty, as he is no longer suitable for his new life. Nevare arranges for Sir Lofty to be taken care of and spends a disheartening evening at a tavern, feeling the weight of his fall from grace. In Chapter 12, Nevare travels through abandoned settlements and faces hunger. At a courier station, he tries, but fails to enlist. He eventually finds shelter in a nearly deserted town, where Amsel, a woman struggling to survive, offers him food and shelter in exchange for labor. As they work together, she shares her painful story of hardship, loss, and survival. Nevare helps with wood gathering and hunting, forming a fragile bond. Despite discomfort, he resolves to leave at first light, fearing what his future might hold if he remains trapped in uncertainty. In Chapter 13, Nevare helps Amsel and her children despite his desire to leave. He tends to Lieutenant Hitch's injuries, gaining his trust. A dream reinforces his intention to reach Geddes to enlist. Amsel is wary, and Nevare contemplates building an inn, but ultimately decides to take Hitch to Geddes. After hunting, Nevare kills a deer using his magic, sharing it with Amsel. He reflects on his father's expectations and his uncertain future at Geddes. Nevare is disturbed when Hitch speaks of Amsel's past, realizing that his idealized view of her is more complicated than he thought. In Chapter 14, Nevare and Lieutenant Hitch journey through difficult terrain toward Geddes. Nevare uses his magic to bless a garden, causing the plants to grow quickly and his body to change. Hitch, sick with fever, struggles physically, and Nevare cares for him. They camp, and Hitch speaks of the Speck magic, telling Nevare about his own past experiences and the harsh realities of the magic. They share stories of their lives, and Nevare begins to question his duty and the nature of the magic he's bound to. Hitch warns him about the magic's power and the cost it demands. In Chapter 15, Nevare Burvelle arrives at Geddes with the injured Lieutenant Hitch, whose condition is dire from a wildcat attack. Upon entering the dilapidated outpost, Nevare notices the neglect and decay. After taking care of Hitch, Nevare seeks out Colonel Heron to enlist. The colonel, eccentric and disorganized, initially dismisses Nevare, but after reading Hitch's recommendation, he reluctantly agrees to accept him. The colonel tasks Nevare with guarding a cemetery plagued by mysterious violations. Nevare accepts, and, as the chapter ends, he is instructed to take Hitch's saddlebags back to him. In Chapter 16, Nevare Burvelle is tasked with guarding a cemetery and adjusting to his new role. He reflects on the neglect and decay around him, feeling isolated and disconnected from others, particularly after seeing his cousin Epony. Despite his internal conflict and discomfort with his body and rank, Nevare works diligently, constructing a shelter for his horse, Clove. He finds solace in physical labor, but struggles with feelings of envy and embarrassment. As the day ends, he experiences a sense of quiet satisfaction, yet the chapter closes with a deep, lingering sense of personal bleakness. In Chapter 17, Nevare reflects on his past use of Speck magic, particularly the curse he placed on a courier station and its unintended consequences. Hitch warns him of the magic's power over him, advising caution. Nevare grapples with guilt and confusion, questioning the morality of his actions and the impact of his magic. He contemplates forgiveness, but struggles to truly feel it. Nevare resolves to return a rucksack to Amsel despite Hitch's cynicism, while reflecting on the complexities of his choices and his uncertain future. Ultimately, he remains unsure of whether he truly worked magic or not. In Chapter 18, Nevare reflects on his isolation in Geddes and his struggles with harsh conditions. He hears rumors about a soldier's murder and is falsely accused of a crime. Spink visits, revealing that Nevare's disappearance had led people to believe he was dead. He shares troubling news about the regiment's decline and its low morale, worsened by superstitions. Nevare learns that Epony struggles with Speck magic, affecting the town. He receives a letter from Jarl expressing concern over his death and the family's decline, including Sergeant Durrell's dismissal. Nevare prays for the safety of his loved ones. In Chapter 19, winter intensifies, bringing rising tensions and increased discipline under the king's scrutiny. Spink faces mounting pressure, and a soldier under his command dies. The narrator is haunted by a growing sense of being watched while gathering firewood, eventually hearing mocking laughter. Hitch informs him that his gift to Amsel has worsened her paranoia. The narrator reflects on his unintended consequences. As the chapter progresses, Hitch reveals the Forest magic, which influences soldiers, weakening morale. The narrator, struggling with guilt and the magic's pull, seeks distraction and visits a brothel, leading to unexpected consequences and rumors. In Chapter 20, spring arrives in Geddes, and Nevare struggles with his uncontrollable magic while working on physical tasks. He encounters his former fiancée, Carcina, who refuses to help him contact his sister. He discovers a robbed grave and sets off to track the body, leading him into an ancient forest. There he finds the stolen body, guarded by a Speck man and a naked woman. Despite her provocative behavior, Nevare forces himself to remove the corpse from the tree, discovering roots had entered the body. He eventually ties the body to his horse, warning the Specks to leave his people's graves alone. In Chapter 21, Trooper Burv reports a stolen body to Colonel Heron, who advises caution. Burvy's requests for a dog to track the body and building a fence around the cemetery are denied due to resource constraints. Later, Burv is accused by Sarlamogam of Fala's disappearance, leading to a confrontation where Burv injures Stiddick. He begins to build a fence, but is interrupted by Kilakura, a Speck, who leads him to the Kembra trees. Kilakura interacts with Burv intimately, and despite his hesitation, he is drawn into the encounter, learning about sensuality. In Chapter 22, Nevare wakes in the forest, disoriented, and searches for Alekia without success. As he travels, he recalls slaying Tree Woman in a dream and finds the sword lodged in a fallen tree. He reflects on his role in the Speck magic's influence and its potential to destroy his own people. Back at Geddes, Nevare learns from Ebrooks and Kesey that they assumed he was dead. At town, he finds Specks trading goods, and the colonel is pleased to see him alive, though uninterested in his forest experience. Nevare also confronts Spink, who shares troubling news about his sister's potential marriage to Calder Steed. In Chapter 23, Amsel seeks Nevare's help after killing a man to protect her children, but he refuses her offer to work for him, instead giving her money to escape the brothel. Nevare feels isolated and distant from his companions. He later meets Olika, who lures him to her village, where he's introduced as a Great One and challenged by Jadoli to prove who is the better mage. Nevare accepts the challenge, but later wakes up alone in a forest, confused and disoriented, unable to remember what happened. He struggles through the forest to return to his world, now uncertain of his situation. In Chapter 24, Nevare reflects on his failures and emotional turmoil. Spink brings a letter from Nevare's sister Carcina, revealing her attempt to ruin his reputation, but Spink has successfully contained the damage. Nevare writes a letter to his sister, explaining his situation and offering her a place to stay. Spink advises him to embrace his role as a soldier and work towards earning rank. Nevare, torn between his duty and his connection to the Specks, feels guilty about his involvement in the road project. Later, Alekia confronts him, urging him to embrace his role as a Great One and fulfill his duty to the Specks. In Chapter 25, Nevare balances his military duties with his secret life in the forest, where he tends to the cemetery and bonds with Alekia. He struggles with guilt over Fala's death and the brutal road project, which dehumanizes prisoners. He faces the conflict between his people and the Specks, realizing the destruction of sacred trees marks the start of a dangerous conflict. Guided by Jadoli, he learns the elders believe only two outcomes are possible. The Gernians must leave or die. Nevare vows to return to his people and prevent further destruction, seeking a peaceful resolution. In Chapter 26, Nevare returns home, uncertain whether his recent magical experience was real or a dream. Determined to warn Colonel Harron about the Specks dust dance, which he believes spreads a deadly plague, he arrives in Gettys to find the road project already progressing. Despite his warnings, Colonel Harron dismisses the importance of the sacred trees. Nevare then rushes to stop the dust dance, but fears it is too late. As he discusses his suspicions with Amsel, he learns the Specks have already left town, and he prepares to protect those he cares about from the impending plague. In Chapter 27, Nevare is attacked by mounted men wounded by a gunshot and left for dead. His magic heals him, but drains his energy. Afterward, Nevare contemplates distancing himself from both his people and the Specks, finding solace in his role as a gravedigger. He is later visited by Spink, who thought Nevare was dead after hearing about the death of several men found around his stolen wagon. Nevare admits he likely killed them in self-defense, though he doesn't understand how. The two discuss the growing threat of the Speck plague, and Nevare plans to return to town. In Chapter 28, Nevare succumbs to Alika's magical pull and joins her in the forest, where their night together revitalizes him but ends in horror when she admits her role in spreading plague dust in Gettys. Determined to resist the magic, Nevare awakens with stained hands and learns the plague has intensified, with coffins arriving in Gettys, filling graves he had dug. As he helps unload bodies, Nevare realizes even acquaintances like the barber have succumbed to the plague. Alone at dusk, he is tasked with guarding the corpses, facing the relentless toll the disease takes on his regiment. In Chapter 29, Nevare brings medicine for Hitch, but finds him dead. He mourns, reflecting on the weight of his losses and responsibilities. After respectfully placing Hitch in a coffin, Nevare prepares for the day ahead, only to discover Hitch's body is missing. He decides to bury the empty coffin, anticipating a new day with unyielding resolve. Epony, who previously aided Nevare with medicine and shared that Hoster, his accuser, might soon die, also warns him of her lingering mistrust due to his secrecy. Nevare, now resolved to improve his situation for his family, faces the challenges ahead alone. In Chapter 30, Nevare, burdened by grief and guilt, prepares to bury bodies, including Carcina's. That night, she reappears as a plague walker, seeking his forgiveness. He recalls his harsh words that bound her spirit and forgives her, vowing to treat others more kindly. As Nevare prepares to find her husband, he discovers that 6 bodies have risen as walkers. He follows them, realizing they are drawn to the trees. In a desperate attempt to save them, Nevare is confronted by the decaying Dale Hardy, who attacks him, knocking him unconscious. In Chapter 31, Nevare, imprisoned and badly injured, learns from Spink that he is accused of feeding dead bodies to trees, including Carcina Thayer's, whose body was found in his bed. Nevare denies the charges, explaining Carcina was a walker he tried to help. Spink reveals the evidence against Nevare, including a letter from Sergeant Hoster linking him to Fala's murder. Despairing, Nevare considers pleading guilty to avoid a public trial. Spink urges him to fight, reminding him that Epony still believes in him. Nevare refuses, and Spink leaves, frustrated by Nevare's resignation. In Chapter 32, Lysana, trapped in a dream-walking state, converses with Tree Woman and Epony. Lysana reflects on the consequences of Spink's potential betrayal, considering it a threat to her family's reputation. In the dream, Tree Woman and Epony discuss their willingness to sacrifice for Nevare's survival, with Tree Woman threatening to claim Epony's child. Nevare offers to serve the magic in exchange for Epony's safety, but Tree Woman explains the magic will decide. Epony, despite her fear and exhaustion, agrees to help, ingesting magical berries that heighten her connection to the forest magic. In Chapter 33, Nevare faces his court-martial with resignation. He is condemned to death after witnesses testify against him, and Clara Gorling demands he receive 1,000 lashes before being hanged. Nevare endures physical and emotional pain as he is dragged through the streets, reflecting on his impending death. Spink visits, offering a final moment of comfort and sharing news of Epiny's calmness and her engagement to Calder Steed. Nevare requests that Spink lie about his death to protect his family's honor. As Spink leaves, an explosion rocks the prison, and Nevare wonders if Epiny is involved. In Chapter 34, Nevare discovers a crack in his prison wall, revealing an escape route. Amsel finds him and explains that Epiny caused the explosion to free him, though it was the wrong prison. She helps Nevare onto his horse and plans to distract the guards, urging him to flee. As they race through town, Nevare is caught by soldiers and Amsel is attacked. In desperation, Nevare uses magic to stop the mob and commands everyone to forget what they saw. After ensuring Amsel and Spink are safe, Nevare rides away, bound to the magic that now controls him.